All right. So, hello. I um I just want to start by saying that I have some resources here. Um my talk, and then underneath my talk I have some other recent talks that I gave that relate, and the end of my talk sort of bleeds into the topic of the other things that I do, the other talks that I've given recently. So they're really like further resources on these topics, and it's all here. I'm happy to share my research with people. And on that same point, if you do want to hear more about those things, or rather peruse, I brought my little notebook of best excerpts from Konrad Martius. I have as well a resource on second order phenomenology, which is a topic that I'm intending at some point to bring together in an explicit articulation with second order cybernetics, because they share the same formal structure. They're just different disciplines. So Origin thinks sixth Cartesian meditation. I'll be putting these things out for perusal. And finally, my last meta comment before I read my talk is this folder is my ontology folder and has the diagrams that I might allude to. Konrad Martius has a diagram and some other diagrams, as well the Spencer Brown diagrams that we're more familiar with, and my interpretations of them, and further resources like that. So these I will have available for perusal, or you can contact me, right? Okay, so my talk is, it's a mouthful, Phenomenology in the Flotation Tank, Renewing John C. Lilly's Phenomenological Experimental Research Center, PERC, with Thinking the Float Tank. In an effort to create an environment conducive to a first-person science of consciousness, neuroscientist John C. Lilly invented the sensory deprivation chamber, or flotation tank. Lilly's research paradigm, which included a central place for phenomenology, led to the development of his flotation tank laboratories in Big Sur, California, called the Phenomenology Experimental Research Center, PERC. I have some photos of these things. There's John Lilly. And here's a little bit of, I'm just flipping around. There's a lot of slides here. I'm not going to be programmatically going through them all. So I'm going to just sort of flip around as I go, right? While it is unclear how much Lilly relied upon Husserl's methods, it is evident that the anaesthetic environment of the flotation tank provides a tool for phenomenological experimentation. In the early days of PERC, Lilly was experimenting with the use of a mathematical text, laws of form, as an approach to inner space. Lilly's move from experimental psychology to a cosmology of inner space relied on that text's central mathematical operation, the first distinction. This primordial act of distinction is, for Lilly, the crossing of the boundary common to all phenomena. As Dermot Moran has recently suggested, this primary distinction is perhaps closest to Husserl's mature 1907 onwards concept of the transcendental ego's ability to take a stance on itself, which Husserl calls ego splitting. In 1973, Lilly and Alan Watts invited the book's author, George Spencer Brown, to lead a week-long seminar called the American University of Masters Conference. Since the days of PERC and the Ohm Conference, the scientific and philosophical landscape has changed significantly. This presentation reviews the past, initiates updates in certain areas of the science and philosophy relevant to Lilly's program, and finally proposes a new framework based on Lilly's work. Here's some pictures of the folks meditating at Esalen, and you can find this journal in the back as well. That is a reproduction of the transcripts that are also online of what happened there at the Ohm Conference 50 years ago, 51. At the Contemporary Art Museum, West Den Haag, in The Hague, in the summer of 2023, The interdisciplinary conference Thinking the Float Tank marked the 50th anniversary of the Ohm conference. Thinking the Float Tank aimed at bringing to the attention of Husserlian phenomenologists, psychologists, and psychical researchers to Lilly's void method of inner space travel through what he called Spencer Brown's doorway. Novel ways through the mind to essential structures. Such practices call for synthesis with phenomenological psychology, eidetic and ontological phenomenology, and new approaches to the field of immanence. Thinking the Float Tank reconstructed Lilly's phenomenological research and also focused on bringing that work into conversation with contemporary work in Husserlian phenomenology. In this presentation, the tour through flotation science will culminate in a new ontology and phenomenology that I am proposing based on laws of form and specifically designed for the flotation tank experience. In the summer of 2023, the contemporary art group exhibit, it's a group exhibition, Gödel, Escher, Bach, exhibited from the spring to the fall of 2023, May 19 to August 27, culminated with the interdisciplinary conference Thinking the Float Tank, August 24 to 26, at the museum and former US Embassy, West Den Haag in the Netherlands. This conference brought together phenomenologists, psychologists, I already said these things, I will skip down a little. 50 years earlier to that date, in 1973, a gathering in the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, dubbed the American University of Masters Conference. Sorry. I'm going to skip that part, of course, it's a little redundant, right? And we know who Spencer Brown is. I actually wrote the most recent iteration of this talk for the, ready? Phenomenology and the Human Sciences, the Society for Phenomenology and the Human Sciences in Duquesne University in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago. All right. Though we know Spencer Brown, I'll read starting here anyway. Spencer Brown was a unique personality. He was a student of such philosophers as Russell, Wittgenstein, and Whitehead. Russell wrote well of Spencer Brown in his autobiography and has also supported Laws of Form, saying of its publication that Spencer Brown has succeeded in doing what is very rare indeed. He has revealed a new calculus of great power and simplicity. Where Whitehead and Russell placed the theory of types to disallow complex values in the algebra of logic, equations of the type a plus b times the square root of -1, and where Wittgenstein sought but failed to find in propositional form the, quote, one and only primitive sign in logic, Tractatus 5.472, Spencer Brown succeeded, I'll suggest. And for these, I would refer to Graham's comments in the next issue of Cybernetics and Human Knowing, which is also back there. Spencer Brown succeeded in discovering a purer form of logical thought based on the higher logic of the act of drawing a distinction in the unmarked state of the void. Spencer Brown's void-based calculus of indications has had a significant impact on numerous fields of science and mathematics, notably for the purposes of second-order cybernetics. The second-order move is really a move to a hidden first-orderness or primordiality. I would suggest this is a sort of critique of the names of these things, right? This is the case for cybernetics, phenomenology, monadology, and other such sciences. Most importantly, it is a move back to the strange origin that is also telos, the ever-present origin, the infinite center of the infinite sphere. This meta shift in levels from the ordinary to the primordinary is a shift to the extraordinary, superordinary, or more precisely, all ordinary. As far as paradigm shifts go, this is the ultimate possible paradigm shift, back to the original sphere of the paradigm. The relation of second-order cybernetics to second-order phenomenology was introduced at Thinking the Float Tank, and the consideration of laws of form as a formal ontological paradigm in relation to the thought of Husserl, Heidegger, Hedwig Conrad Matthias, and Anna-Teresa Temeniecka have been recently represented in my work through the Spencer Brown Society, at the Laws of Form conferences, its publications of Laws of Form at 50th Anniversary, World Scientific last year, the big book, and Distinction, Journal of Form, and also in the journal Analecta Husserliana, my essays in 2023 and 24. The activity of the Spencer-Brown Society has also involved the participation of such phenomenologists as Claire Ortiz-Hill, Barry Smith, Dermot Moran, Irena Breuer, as well as Kyoto School philosophers, amplifying the void-based aspect of the laws of form and Spencer-Brown's own Tathagata consciousness, in addition to numerous other philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians. There is certainly more that can be said about the incipient shift, but the important thing is to be able to be open to its possibility and then to actualize it. Enter the float tank. John Lilly's Flotation Science of Consciousness. So John C. Lilly, 1915, and died in 2001, invented the flotation tank. The invention comes from a context of scientific work curious enough to call for a brief review. The flotation tank, in its present familiar form, comes from the sensory deprivation chambers designed by Lilly in his 1954 research at the National Institutes of Mental Health. The purpose of these experimental designs were to allow for the attenuation of sense stimuli in wakeful, healthy human subjects below the thresholds of awareness. Before developing the flotation tank in the 1940s and 50s, Lilly's research on healthy human subjects in extreme states, such as high altitude and submarine environments, provided the context for developing neurological studies on isolation by water immersion, involving diving-inspired gear, and such apparatus as air hoses and pumps for breathing. During those times, Lilly worked with the military and was commissioned to work with the covert intelligence agencies and private scientific companies with government contracts for the purpose of developing brain implants and other neurological methods of control. In his 1964 and 65 work at NIM, Lilly conducted experiments combining LSD-25 with the flotation tank environment. Indeed, before that, he says, he wasn't using LSD and ketamine in the float tank like he was later. It was actually when he was commissioned to be an expert on dolphins on the set of Flipper, that Flipper's trainer's wife, who was an LSD a psychoanalyst and enthusiast, finally convinced Lilly to use LSD in the flotation tank. So we can thank Flipper the dolphin for that. The results are summed up in his 1972 book, Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer. Later, Lilly went on to focus on communication between the humans and cetacea, like dolphins and whales, under a special project named after the Greek god of portals, the Joint Analog Numeric Understanding System, Project Janus. In 1961, Lilly wrote a text serving as a handbook for communication with the cetacea, Man and Dolphin, 1961, making him a pioneer in interspecies communication. Connected to this last point, also, in 1961, the National Academy of Science gathered Lilly along with other such scientists as Frank Drake and Carl Sagan together under the project called the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI, which originally adopted the moniker the Order of the Dolphin after Lilly's work in that area. All throughout this activity, Lilly was guided by entities, which he called supra-self and supra-species metaprogrammers, interested in Lilly's own life, his work, and in the human species. In his various biographical and autobiographical texts, such as Center of the Cyclone, 1972, The Dyadic Cyclone, 1976, The Scientist, 1988, John Lilly's So Far, 1990, encounters with these entities beginning in childhood and expanding in the work in the tank are recounted in detail. Lilly envisioned the hierarchy of such entities and their respective domains as something like a cosmic government conspiracy of coincidence control centers. Lilly writes that the conferences between himself and these beings consisted of direct communication of thought, meaning, and feeling without the mediation of such things as words in order to write about these details. In order to write about such things, Lilly had to translate these things into words. Lilly describes a system of coincidence control centers. The Cosmic Coincidence Control Center, CCCC, Galactic Coincidence Control Center, Solar System Coincidence Control Center, and the Earth Coincidence Control Center, or ECCO, ECHO. Such entities were not all benevolent. He goes into detail about these. I'll skip a bit about this, but basically there's a sort of like a technological singularity sort of situation with Earth's mineral and metal nature being transformed by materialism technologies, leading to something he called the solid state intelligence. And that was the sort of like embodiment of certain of these more malevolent beings. But, you know, there's all sorts, right? In this big picture of various entities. All right. John Lilly used laws of form in the flotation tank, and I think the best details are recounted in the dyadic cyclone, which is in the back as well. You can check that out. I can refer you to specific sections and such. It's also on my website. The cross is identified with a symbol called the marked state operator, which looks like an inverted capital letter L or a right angle bracket. You all know. And which eventually can be said to move through a mathematical phase space or configuration space called by Spencer Brown the pervasive space or indicative space, according to the two titular laws of form. The purpose of the adoption of this paradigm is the radical freedom that from presuppositions that is to be found in the syntax of the indication of the first distinction, characterized by a powerful new notation system. The two laws of form themselves are called the axioms of calling and crossing, and together they make the calculus of indications, which gives Spencer Brown's paradigmatic architecture. All right. Now, I know, of course, us here at this audience are quite familiar with all that, but at this point in the talk, I describe a bit of Lilly's employment of it in this sense, and that's why I redeploy to you what you already know about laws of form, but in this way, so that, you know, I gloss it in that fashion, right? Okay, the flotation tank is like a hole in the universe, a portal to alternative universes. At NIM, Lilly writes, I devised the isolation tank. I found the isolation tank was a hole in the universe. I gradually began to see through to another reality. It scared me. I didn't know about alternate realities at the time, but I was experiencing them left and right, end quote. In his early work at the Virgin Islands Flotation Tank Laboratories, 1964 to 66, Lilly was already thinking of the flotation tank or isolation chamber as a portal or a, quote, doorway. But this term came to refer more precisely to what he later called Spencer Brown's doorway. And this Spencer Brown's doorway, opened by Lilly's application of laws of form, is what Lilly called the void method. In order to traverse the void, the minimal self-operator was assumed to be a quantum of consciousness in a materially sub-quantum space. In order to ride the Spencer Brown marked state operator into other universes, this minimal operator was taken through the levels of the calculus of indications, corresponding to the chapters of the book, to the last chapter, chapter 12, re-entry into the form, which contains a whole series of re-entry experiments. Lilly considered the tank a hole in the universe, and each time he passed through that portal, the world and its primordial positivity was put in brackets, with Lilly as the bracket itself, and each time he emerged, the universe and the person was reconstituted in a way that could be described with radical essential precision. So that's the gist of like how I imagine, through a little reconstruction and through extensive research into John Lilly and all the connecting points to laws of form, what was going on in the tank, right, with his void method. Okay, and in my final section, I go into the possibility of a different sort of method that builds on and is related to the way Lilly was using the tank, but particularly not so much using the very, very applicable transcendental phenomenology of Husserl, Landgrave, Fink, to Timieniecka, this whole line of phenomenology, but rather that of one of Husserl's early students who departed from that line with a different kind of phenomenology that wasn't so reductive and wasn't so epistemological or centered on consciousness per se, but rather is called ontological phenomenology and is specifically made for this sort of work of the world and the universe and such. Okay, so this is my last little section here. A new framework, Konrad Martius plus Spencer Brown. And the gist, I'll just do one more gloss. The gist is that laws of form provides what Husserl calls a formal ontological paradigm, which is also what Barry Smith was calling it after what I called it. And he's our formal ontologist, one of the formal ontologists we've had here, right? So there's this side, right? The analytic side, that's Spencer Brown's paradigm, you could say, centered on what Lilly called Spencer Brown's doorway, gate, or portal. And then Konrad Martius has a material ontology, according to the Husserlian division of ontologies, which she also develops her real ontology and material ontology into what she calls universal ontology, which is very interesting and definitely needs to be compared to the Heideggerian and existential phenomenology of what is called a fundamental ontology. Universal ontology is what we're using in this new framework. So last section, a new framework, Konrad Martius plus Spencer Brown. The intention behind the original Phenomenology Experimental Research Center needs to be renewed and the center reopened. At the core of Lilly's method lies the door within the door. Spencer Brown's door is a formal ontological device of the first distinction, which invites primordial crossing and phenomenological experimentation. Husserl's method of the transcendental phenomenological reduction of psychological experience is the portal to the field of consciousness in its pure immanence. There are many lines of research that emanate from this connection between Lilly and Husserl's methods in consciousness science, but at Thinking the Float Tank, Dermot Moran directly invoked a number of these possibilities. For instance, Husserl's idea of the transcendental ego's ability to take a stance on itself, called ego splitting, as well as Dan Zahavi's idea of the minimal self. More can be said about the way that the phenomenology of phenomenology and the cybernetics of cybernetics are structurally similar, as well as similar in intent, and can be thought of as providing the perfect framework for our door within a door, or second order door. But let's conclude this talk with the final suggestion of a new framework. Konrad Martius's reduction is a bracket that takes the form of a door, or gate, Tür, Pforte, of reality. In her 1923 Real Ontology, Konrad Martius illustrates her central thesis with the imagery of a door, the door of reality. This door or gate is a border crossing, she says. And I have various references here for her specific quotes, various uses of the term door, tor, etc. Like Spencer Brown's act of crossing the first distinction, a crossing of the threshold of transcendence. Finally, Konrad Martius's cosmogony posits a crossing of the primordial movement, or originary dynamism, or Bewegung, or dynamic, as the first creation of real being from nothingness. This primordial situation for Konrad Martius is, quote, the entry and departure point for true metaphysics. Konrad Martius's portal can be traversed two ways, like Spencer Brown's doorway, and bringing together the material ontology of Konrad Martius's doorway with the formal ontology of Spencer Brown's doorway, with the pure transcendence of the first distinction and the ultimate frame of reference of the infinite sphere, is the way forward for a very fruitful phenomenological flotation science. And that's the end of my talk.
All right, thank you, Randy. All right, questions? Yeah, Luke.
Could you say a few words about the philosophical history of the concept of the infinite sphere?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I guess I don't need that. Sorry. Yeah, so the term itself, the infinite sphere, it comes from the Book of the 24 Philosophers. This was the text that inspired Nicholas of Cusa, who is the key figure in explaining all the paradoxes of the infinite and infinite polygons, infinite triangles, the infinite sphere. You see all these things in his various writings. It also inspired others later, Pascal, even in like Heidegger's latest Gesamtausgabe that was released, for instance, he refers to the Hermetic, mysterious infinite sphere. He talks about it. The book, the 24 Philosophers, is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. And now, a synonym for infinite sphere is the Neoplatonic concept of the sphere of the all, Stoic sphere of the all, Platinian sphere of the all one, and as well, you can find this in various cultures, of course, but as well the pre-Socratics, like Empedocles famously, the Spyros, Nikos, and is strife, or like the not sphere state, like the marked state, which is sort of like oddness in a Pythagorean sense, whereas the Pythagorean evenness is this perfect sphericity that he calls love, the what is it? Sphyra Philotes. Okay, anyway, the point is that it is the transparency of the disclosure space in a phenomenological sense. It is the unmarked state. It is that evenness of the aoristos dias, the two-ness of the Pythagoreans and of Plato, that sort of like reduces to the unmarked state, you can say. So at every even level, there is the presence and superpresence of the infinite sphere. That's kind of like what I'm suggesting with, the next step. My own contribution is making the infinite sphere the housing of the first distinction, and then working from there.
Yeah, so I'd like to ask, as you say, your contribution is making that apparent.
Yeah.
And how are you doing that through the float tank as something different, or how is it integrated with the thought of Spencer Brown and the gateway that he's saying is naturally in existence? So what's the relation between something that's naturally present and the float tank as something?
Just like any meditative practice, I think personally Patanjali's idea of asamprajnata samadhi, framed by the whole procession through the samprajnata samadhis, but any meditative practice, the hesychasm of Parmenides and the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition, etc. Various rituals, practices have this approach through symmetry, approach through gates that are symmetric. A mantra, the repetition of a mantra, or a nice song, a mandala and a yantra, right? You eventually get to this strange kind of point. It's not an ordinary point in the like Euclidean sense, although I think there is a sort of esoteric Euclideanism behind Euclid. Perhaps the whole tradition is a sort of indication of something deeper. But anyway, that point, it is the ever-present origin, right? The center of the infinite sphere. And so you have a practice in your like quiet place, or in the flotation tank with the hypothesis, the positing of the hypothesis of something like a cosmic centering device, like an infinite sphere. You do that in the tank, but you bring it out in the world, right? I mean, we bring our cosmogonic inner space maps out to match up with the real world. This can only be done, I think, with a map that has enough room for us, reality and speculation. And so one with enough room, right? Bring it out into the world. Yeah, they like match up.
Line is also. Oh, okay.
Do you want to do the online one first?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead online. Whoever has a question online. Sorry. I can't...
Yeah. Hi, Randy.
Hey.
In programming and metaprogramming the human biocomputer, Lilly took a very strong turn towards binary sort of a computational model of reality. And when we interpret laws of form as logic, we're doing the same thing. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, yeah, basically, I mean, I can't remember exact details and stuff. It could be that stuff was before he was really inspired by laws of form, but yeah. So go on though, yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering if, the interface between when we talk about, let's say, infinity, that's not binary, and yet a lot of the math and perspectives were taking are binary. And, I sure would like to see unary show up somewhere.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that there is a definite difference in character of the stuff before the dyadic cyclone. Even in the center of the cyclone, where he praises laws of form, he doesn't quite go into it. You don't see him using it. And furthermore, I don't think that Lilly is necessarily the best representative of this stuff. I think Spencer Brown is, of course. I just like the way Lilly used it. And I think that this is a sort of use of laws of form that has tremendous potential. How's that, William?
Oh, it's great to hear about Lilly, one of my favorite guys.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Shall we go to Irena?
Yeah, Irena, go ahead.
Yes, great talk, Handy. I would like to ask you, in your conception, how would you conceive the passage from nothingness, whole nothingness, to everything, to reality? Because if there is not a potentiality of being in this nothingness, how can from nothingness evolve something? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Irena. Yeah, this is the cosmogonic dimension of exactly what can be described in formal analytic terms with laws of form, which begins with this first distinction. I mean, Spencer Brown's idea is that finally all there ultimately is the unmarked state. This is the category of the infinite, Whitehead says, or the category of the ultimate, right? But this thing, which seems to be devoid of this kind of like material reality, is actually ultimate reality. And as this unconditioned shunyata, right? This ultimate reality is always there. It's just always already there, but that which is ever present to us on this side of being in some derivative, non-ultimate reality has to pass through the first distinction, which is penultimate reality. And then through all the levels of anti-penultimate reality, etc., through this cosmogonic derivation, and finally to exactly precisely where we are, which is nicely laid out in the formalisms of Spencer Brown. And I find something very similar in the cosmogonic dimension of Hedwig Conrad Martius. So exploring Hedwig Conrad Martius from a phenomenological perspective, I think can really help articulate like her concept of the derivation of what she calls Wirkliche Wirklichkeit, real reality, the actual indexical universe that we occupy, and distinguishing it from all the procession of its derivation from that state. How's that, Irena?
Yeah, thank you. Great.
All right, cool.
Okay, so
Questions
back
in the
with
room?
me,
Yeah, Leon.
Leon. Did I really hear you just say now that Spencer Brown thought everything that ever was just the unmarked state? Did we start from the unmarked state? Where does Spencer Brown say that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's maybe my reading. I don't know. I think if you want to start like you do in England at level 0, right? Like our elevators, our floors in America, we start at 1. It's kind of like, do you start at 1 or do you start at 0? There's a weird thing about this ultimate reality. If we're going to say it's a reality or a weird kind of existence, it definitely has to be distinguished from what we call existence, right? And, Spencer Brown starts with the first distinction, but it is the first distinction from the unmarked state. And there's a pervasive nature of that space within which the first distinction and the form and the marked state can exist. So there is definitely a priority to the first distinction and a super pervasive presence or super presence of the unmarked state.
Okay, then may I suggest you don't use the term unmarked state, because it is the unmarked state of the form, and you refer to the epigraph, which is the nameless or the void. It's more accurate, I think.
One can call it the nameless, the void, the nothing, Jakob Boehme's Das Nichts, right? But I am saying that this is the ultimate reality, a synonym. I'm using this as a synonym as well as the absolute infinite, to be distinguished from the infinitum secundum quid, the infinitely many of Hilbert's hotel rooms, etc. So the good infinite, as opposed to Hegel's evil infinite of desire and of so much. This is just over much. Overwhelming overflowingness can't even grasp itself. God pouring God into God. You might call it God. Spencer Brown calls it maybe the Godhead, but he does definitely prefer the nameless or nothing or nothingness or pure and radical nothingness, I would say.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Let me
can I try to say
sure,
what
Lyle,
I'm
quick,
saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so remember the ending of the laws of form. In the form, the mark, the distinction, and the observer are one. Okay, so from the point of view of the observer who makes the first distinction, he gets to pick whether he's marked and the inside of his first decision is unmarked or the other way around. And he seems to actually play with that a little.
I perceive multiple levels already occurring in that sort of description, but yeah.
Well, but the point is that is the beginning. Okay, that there is a beginning is something that you've got to accept. Okay, and that beginning has a finite inside.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we are in the finite inside.
Yeah.
All the observations we've made so far is that the universe we inhabit is closed. We are on the inside.
10 more seconds. Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Oh yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Then, thank you very much, Randy.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.